Present. Okay, meeting called to order. 10-2 budget meeting. Val Humble present. Karen?
Karen Myers present.
Leslie?
Leslie Sawyer present.
And Kathy's not here yet, right? But that is a quorum. First item on the agenda is a public comment. Is there any member of the public who wishes to say anything?
I don't see anybody, and I'm not aware that anyone registered ahead of time either.
Okay. And the next on the agenda, we have, what do we have here? We have contract approval by Kelly Shribble.
Hi, board members. We just wanted to do a quick introduction to this new standing agenda item. This is going to be a time where we bring to you contracts that are outside of the authority that was given to staff through the LCRB rules. That's your local contract review board. I think Karen is your representative on that board. And so in general, that's going to be contracts and task orders over $50,000 for single districts contracts and over $100,000 for multi-district contracts. Or anything that doesn't fit within the rules that the LCRB has set for you. So we just want to make you aware of that. So we're just going to leave that as a standing agenda item so that we have a constant reminder that we need to make those approvals.
But there are none this time, is that correct?
To my knowledge, there are none this time.
Okay, thank you. I guess Casey's now up with the budget discussion.
Oh boy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Budget Fund.
Casey, do you mind if I?
Oh, yes, please, please. Kick her off.
I appreciate it. First of all, I want to thank Casey and staff for putting together a economically viable budget for this year and bringing that forward. I just wanted to hit a couple of the goals or strategies that we worked with and I put out there. One is the goal was to present a budget that reflects critical priorities that staff can really realistically execute based on our available resources, based on COVID, increased demand of staff by the Urban Flood Safety Water Quality District, and trying to look at more of the projects of going in and taking bites out of the elephant instead of buying the whole elephant at one time. But if you can buy a piecemeal over a couple of years, which makes it also realistic to execute, was an important mechanism. I think you'll see that when you see the Portland Metro levy system proposal that's part of the budget. And you know, the one thing we recognize and have always recognized that the budget requests are a commitment to the board and the landowners of what we feel is needed and can be executed within a year. Just a quick overview of the priorities, of course, is our critical flood safety and system integrity that first and foremost, none of us are here unless we have that. Also in anticipation of the Portland Metro levy system, recognizing that the first phase of which consisted of the feasibility study was really starting to wind down, and we're starting to prepare ourselves for pre-construction engineering and design, which Casey will talk about in more detail in the budget, but it begins that process. Also the recognition of getting our easements, not only for PED, but for our own organization, for each of the districts in order, and for PEN 2. And to really focus on our multi-district projects, our focus more for moving forward and preparing for the consolidation. So that's just the overall approach that we took this year and wanted to set that up. And I'm going to turn it over to Casey.
Could I
Right.
comment? Could I comment here first? I noticed that Kathy Helen has joined us a couple of minutes ago, so let the minutes reflect that fact. And also I wanted to call attention, page 2, seems to be some kind of typo on the materials where it mentions SDIC instead of
Oh, my
instead
bad,
of Pen 2.
my bad. I
Okay.
found a couple of mistakes myself just this morning that I'll call out. Sorry about that.
Carry on, Casey.
Okay, thank you. As is normal this time of year, I get to tell you that Pen 2 is on solid financial footing. The board has done a great job over the last many years, making sure that you have enough in reserve to be stable and cover all your obligations, both now and in the longer term. I do have two mistakes that I have found since I sent this out that I just want to call out. The first is in line 1 of the narrative. The reserves at the end of the year will not be greater than spending, but they will be only slightly less than spending. Although we don't know exactly how the capital costs for PMLS are going to work out in the next few years, but between now and consolidation, there are some numbers bouncing around that are by no means firm yet, but it's pretty much a given. I think that there will need to be some additional payments made by each of the districts for costs related to the levy study, and particularly the pre-construction engineering and design, or PED phase, between now and consolidation in 4 years or so. So I'll talk about that a little more at the end, but I want to get through the nuts and bolts first. Ongoing operating costs are generally stable. There is a bump in a couple of spending categories that I'll talk about, which results in a significant increase in total spending. And I want to say that the budget does include a 5% assessment increase. And that is to, even though you don't need it for this year, with the likelihood of PED costs of some significance, we thought it prudent to put in a small increase this year to give you a better base. So depending on where those costs come in future years, you don't have to have a big increase. Overall, total resources and requirements, the total amount of the budget is just over $3 million, with $1 million in revenue and just over $2 million in the beginning balance. We expect to start 21-22 with $2,023,000, slightly less, $17,000 less than we started in 2021. These numbers will be updated some because it's like tomorrow that staff is due to have their updates on spending projections for this year. So that number will move around a little bit. It tends to produce a lower spending estimate than a higher one based on between now and a month and a half ago when they did it in the first place. Revenue, my second error here. At one point it was $980,000, but it's really $1,023,000. So that includes $910,000 in landowner assessments with a 5% increase. The next major revenue source is $64,000 from the intergovernmental agreement from 2014 with the City of Portland Bureau of Environmental Services. Then there are smaller amounts. There's another $11,000 from BES for invasive species management and interest development review fees, and some additional assessment related revenue. Expenditures are up to almost $1.6 million. That's up $315,000 over last year, total expenditures. The bump, the big increase of 25%, comes basically from two things. One is a $165,000 project for work on the Bridgeton levee that is being required by the Division of Department of State Lands. And the other is an increase in capital outlay for next year with the ups and downs of the CIP, which is a normal happening. I'll talk about that a little more under capital. Total M&S costs increase $139,000. all of which plus some is because of the $165,000 project on the Bridgeton levee that Colin or somebody will be able to tell us about a little more about than I can. Other than that, it's largely routine ongoing costs. There are some smaller projects going on in ditches and at the pump stations, but ongoing operations, except for this one extraordinary one, are more or less predictable. Projects and planning is down 9% to 170,000. There's 12 line items in this budget, almost all of which, everything but one, is a multi-district project. The one is development review, which all districts have, but they're individual to each district. There are two new items in there that you haven't seen at all before, and those are related to PMLS support. One is for project support and the other for an easement gap analysis. Those two come to $73,000. And they are expected to continue along those lines for the next couple of years. Most of the projects were budgeted last year, some going up, some going down. I won't get into all the details of them, but I'm happy to answer questions. Contracts and agreements is down a little bit. What you have there is this year 2 IGAs that you're used to seeing. One is the agreement with MCDD for staff services. And the second is your share of payment to the Levy Ready Columbia group through the Joint Contracting Authority. That amount hasn't changed. And I think we're budgeting the same or slightly up. I think it's the same this year as next year as the current year for the payment to MCDD. The difference is that you had a small amount of $4,600 going to the Urban Flood Safety and Water Quality District last year as your share of getting it stood up with a princely sum of $40,000 for its operations in the current year. But that's not needed next year as the new district has got its own revenue source. Professional services, $97,000, down 10%. The usual suspects, legal, government relations. Government relations is up primarily due to an error last year. We didn't budget the full amount. I'm not sure why. Community relations is down. Most of the other things are pretty normal. General consulting is a small amount, but we're trying to consolidate some line items. So we're putting most of the ongoing environmental program work for dredging and keeping dredging permits, that sort of thing, in a general consulting line item rather than cluttering up the projects and planning. Administrative expenses up a little, primarily from the cost of liability insurance. Capital, there are 2 projects for $532,000. The big one is $416,000 for 13th Avenue Pump Station discharge pipes. This is another project that we need to do, both because it needs to be done and because we're being told that we have to do it. We're not exactly sure what the total cost of this project is going to be, but it will be a chunk of change next year, $416,000. There may be additional costs later, we just don't know yet. And then $116,000 for OSHA fall protection to complete the safety structure at Dick's Ditch and to design and permit a structure at a site from Wabash Covert to Jubitz. That's the same amount that was budgeted last year for this. Debt service remains unchanged at $125,000, paying off the commercial loan ahead of time. That will be retired in 23-24, so this coming year and then 2 more. Ending balance is down 16%, but it's still very robust in comparison with your expenditures. It's $1,462,000, a bit less than total spending, as I noted at the top. So, summary, what does this all mean? You're in a strong financial position. You have good, strong reserves, although PMLS PED costs in coming years may put a strain on your ability to continue with little to no increases. As I said, we don't know what those costs are going to be. We expect them to start coming due in 22, 23. But the latest figure I've seen was $890,000 for PED over the course of 3 or 4 years following next year. We don't know what those numbers are going to be finally. We're not going to know for a while. There's going to be work done on that next year, and there's also going to need to be work among the districts and your partners in determining whether the districts are going to have to foot this bill all on their own, or if they're going to be able to get some help somewhere. Since we don't know that, it's hard to pin down what exactly it will take. If the number that I told you, the 890,000, were to hold, it would take probably 6 to 7% assessment increases from here through consolidation. So that's a big reason why we're asking for a 5% increase in the coming year, is to get us a little closer to what you're going to need. You're going to need to absorb some of those costs, we expect. We just don't know how much. And this is a base to get us going. So that's my quick and dirty version of the budget. Happy to address questions, entertain board discussion.
Do we have any comments by board members? I will pass on that Mary Helen, in her email indicating she wouldn't be able to make this meeting because of a medical appointment, that she is opposed to the 5% increase.
All right.
Any other comments? Are you looking for any kind of action by the board?
No action today. We have another meeting scheduled in 3 weeks or so, I think. At which point we will update the budget with updated information from spending this year, finding new developments, errors, those sorts of things that always seem to come up in the last month or so. And then this meeting is primarily to give you an overview of the budget, to research any issues or questions that you might have that we don't have the answer to right off the top, and to update the budget until for the next meeting. At the next meeting, we would expect that you would say, yes, this budget is fine, or no, make these changes, or I need some questions answered before I can vote on it. Ideally, we come out of the second meeting with consensus among the board members about what you want the budget to look like, and we will bring you that version late in June at the format when you traditionally adopt your budget.
Okay, thank you. There is a question I had about the OSHA fall protection. I understand we're looking to put some kind of support at the 6th Avenue culvert there, but that neither of the ones mentioned in the budget are that culvert. Are they the one across from the Arboretum on 6th Avenue?
Take a bill.
Yeah, let me take a stab at that, if you don't mind. I believe the second one, the one that's labeled as Wabash culvert, is the same as the 6th Avenue culvert that the project team is targeting. I only know of 2 sites. One is the Dick's Ditch site, which is a pretty substantial vault that we're putting in. And the second one is the 6th Avenue site. But before your next meeting, I will double check that the term Wabash culverts and 6th Avenue culverts are one and the same.
And that Dix Avenue one is the one at the end of the road there when you drive down past beside Dix on the north side of Dix.
Correct. It would be on the northeast, off the northeast corner of that building. So it's actually behind the building where their loading dock is, and that's where the culvert. Sorry, that's where the ditch runs into, drains water into a 72-inch culvert that then goes underneath that retail complex over to Schmier Road Pump Station.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I guess I do know where those are then. Thank you. Anything else relevant to this menu item? or agenda item, excuse me.
I like menu.
Okay, let's see what we're on to next.
Okay,
Get lost here on my agenda. I guess we have assets and liabilities draft results with Bill Owen. More typos in that, I noticed.
Yeah, so thank you. Let me just append a comment about the budget with page 20 of your packet. That's the CIP, the 5-year CIP for the Penn 2 district. The total amount is this for FY 21-22 is the same as what Casey just read in the budget, and it does indicate just 2 projects about the OSHA fall protection and the 13th Avenue pump station discharge lines. It also gives you a sense of what projects are coming up in addition to the PMLS work for capital improvements. We've been talking a little bit about upgrades at electrical upgrades at the Schmear Road pump station. I opted to defer that project for until FY 21, 22, 23, excuse me. So that's column FY 20, 23 and on this page. And the reason for that, one is just workload available, staffing. We just don't have enough horsepower in house currently to add another project proposed for next year. But it also provides us a little more time to finish negotiating with the developer at Portland Meadows and at 1505 North Schmear Road property. That's the old Bar None auction site. It's the same developer at both sites. And it's looking promising that that developer is going to be contributing funds towards this project, as well as the motor replacement that's scheduled for next year. So so we may be able to get a little more revenue coming in to offset both of those capital improvements.
So even though we wouldn't be proceeding with the upgrade to the electrical system, we will be proceeding with getting funding for it from those developers.
Correct, in anticipation of those upgrades.
Thank you.
Okay. A couple other things that we want to bring your attention to. One, you'll see for those who've been around for a couple of years, you'll see an item called SCADA system upgrades towards the bottom of the CIP. That may look familiar to you, and it should. That's a project that's we've been working on. A phase of that project we worked on in the last couple of years to upgrade the communication system, and that's important distinction. So what we did have in the pump stations are cellular connections to allow us to remotely control the your pump stations, and they work great except when it rained, which is a problem for us. And so we changed it out. And now we have radio frequency communication because of your approval of that phase of the project. And so similar to many other utilities in our area and around the country, we're using, we have a federally authorized radio connection between us and all of the SCADA sites, all of the pump stations. This amount, the $50,000, $52,000, deals with a separate issue, but also deals with SCADA, and that's the physical unit inside the pump station. Basically, you can almost think of it as a black box, if you will. It's probably the wrong term to use, but it's for those who love electricity theory, it's something you would love to dig your teeth into. That's not me, and I'm glad we have consultants that deal with that, but it's super important because the radio frequency waves have to go through this box to tell the pump station what to do. So it's called Program Logic Control Box, PLC. And we've milked our PLCs for many years, and finally got to a point where the manufacturer and vendor won't support them anymore. So like many things that we encounter in life, sometimes you try to get the most out of your asset you can, and eventually, they just stop supporting it. And when you want to maintain it, you can't because there's no parts available for it. And so that's the case now. We've had these PLCs for many, many years, and we just have to upgrade them because we can't get support from them any longer. So this is a project not just for your district, but for all 4 districts to upgrade the PLCs, because we try to use similar models, because if something breaks down in one place, we have a common repair part that we can just move over, whether it's in your district, whether it's in Penn 1 or so forth. So that's what that project's about. And the other project right below there is about access road improvements for the pump station. We have access through Fazio's property currently. It's functional, but can be a little tight going through there through his operations, and it's to have a more reliable access to the pump station, even during bad weather, because it's all dirt, of course, and on his property. It would be better to have a more reliable access to from a different location. So that's a project a couple of years out, and you'll learn more about that closer to that point. Obviously, the big dollar amounts in here are the PMLS projects. And do I want to mention anything else? There are a couple other things that are in the years 6 through 10 outlook. But unless you have particular questions on those, I think I covered most of the high points of the 5-year CIP.
Are there any questions or comments? Hearing none,
Okay.
if that's all on assets and liabilities, then I guess you're also up for the next item. Is that correct, Bill?
So I appended that to the budget
Okay.
item because to me it's similar to the budget piece. So the next is the assets and liabilities topic. So let me if I'm able to share my screen, I will walk through a PowerPoint slide. You have a PDF. You should have. You may not have a PDF of the PowerPoint slide.
Jasmine, I think you're the meeting host. Can you make Bill a co-host?
Thank you. So in your meeting, as this is being pulled up, in your meeting pack today, it was a little bit lengthy. And the reason for that is there was a 120-page report. A lot of it's in the appendices, so that gets down into the gory details. But hopefully you had a chance at least to glance at the executive summary, which is 2 pages. And we'll go into this PowerPoint presentation, which is only 10 slides. It gives you a sampling of what the contents of that report are. We have Jamie Damon here today, who was our facilitator for the board working group that Mary Helen was able to participate on, and she participated at every meeting and contributed each time. So you were well represented during those conversations. So,
Bill, you should be able to pull up the PowerPoint.
Okay, very good, thank you. So let me see if I can grab this. And so are you all able to see the first slide there? Yep, okay, I got the head nods. Great. So, right, so as you well know, we've been talking about assets and liabilities for some time. This is just a reminder that this is a requirement as part of the ORS 550 statute that says that your district and the other drainage districts need to compile a list of their assets, liabilities, and duties, and report that to the new urban flood safety water quality district prior to dissolution. So this report is the culmination of a little over a year's worth of work from a variety of folks to identify what those assets, liabilities, and duties are, and to the degree we have information available to value that information. So how much are each worth? We were driven by this purpose about to provide an equitable framework to inventory and value those things in order to develop the funding structure that the new urban district has to perform. So we didn't get in, this board working group didn't get into funding options at all about the new urban district. All we're trying to do here is to provide information for them to start their discussions about that topic. So there are 5 people that were involved as the board working group members, including Mary Ellen, of course, and then we had support from Jamie at Kearns and West. FCS group was the financial specialist, and then Brown Caldwell provides some engineering supports I'll get into. This is a quick glimpse of the schedule of the project. You obviously identify where we are. We've been able to get through all the previous tasks. We didn't need to go through the evaluation methods and report outs. We were able to cover those topics a little earlier. So the intent here is to share with you this report of what your assets, liabilities, and duties are. At this point, give you some time to look through the document, make sure you feel comfortable with the contents, and with the intent ultimately to approve the report or the revised version of the report based on your feedback. And so we can then submit that to the new urban district. So that's where we're going. Hope if you're comfortable by the end of June, we can offer a motion to approve the report at that point during the format meeting. So the report itself, it has, like I said, a 2-page executive overview. That's a relatively quick read. And for those who really want to dig into it, there's another 110 pages worth of good stuff in there. And you're welcome to, I'm sure it's a good reading to help fall asleep at night, but there are other times where you may need a little caffeinated beverage. Purpose and background, this is the rest of the general contents. There's background information, a section that Hong was able to put together about duties of the drainage district. There's a section about definitions and methodologies. That piece is something you've already seen back in January about the definitions of assets and liabilities. Nick was able to pull together the assets and liabilities section. And then I wrapped up with some other considerations that the new urban district should be aware of, that your district is going to be and other districts are going to be considering. And then finally, there's some references. So I'm going to quickly go through the main topics here, and then give you an opportunity to ask some questions. On the duty side, the duties are defined as legal commitments or legal expectations to act. On your end, they're determined by exercise of their discretionary statutory authorities and powers to accomplish those purposes. And within this section that Hong put together, and she'll be able to describe, be able to answer any questions you might have about this. There are 4 sections in here related to duties as documented in the reclamation plans and formation plans and reports that are approved by the chief engineer, contracts with the federal government, as well as board resolutions. So to the degree we had information available, quickly available to us, she was able to outline all those duties in there. It's in the main body of the report, and there's a couple, I think there's one appendix B, that digs in a little bit deeper. On the definitions and methodologies section, the first two definitions are ones we talked about back in January of what an asset is and what a liability is. We also talked about what methodology this particular report and approach would use to determine to value assets, and something called original cost less depreciation. Turns out it's the exact same method that your independent auditors use to review your financial records. So it's a little more lengthy title to approach. Basically, you start with the original costs and you just depreciate those costs year by year. It's fairly straightforward. And then at the end, other methodologies are depending on the source of information that's from the engineering analyses. On the assets and liabilities end, Nick was able to pull together the information that was in the 4 auditors reports from FY 1920. That's the most recent one that we have available. You can see here that your net position is just over $6 million, which, oh, sorry, the first, those numbers.
That first number should be just get rid of the 1 and move the comma over 1.
Yeah. So that's my bad. That's not Nick's fault. That's mine. Thank you, Val. So I'll make sure to update this before the next presentation. So yeah. So your net positions is a little bit better than a couple of others, and MCD has the most assets. And has a little more liabilities because of employees that they need to provide. They have employee costs associated with those liabilities. So again, this information is accurate as of June 30 of 2020. We wanted to be really careful about sticking with mirroring what's in the auditors' reports. So this, even though it's an independent document, there's less question about the validity of these numbers, because there are a lot of numbers up here, but if a third party has already reviewed them, we're repackaging them a little bit for this purpose, but the numbers should still be, if I actually put the number correctly up here, the number should be pretty solid. So the final piece is a series of future capital considerations that the new urban district should be aware of, in addition to something called intangible assets. Intangible assets, as you imagine, are things like easements and deeds that you hold, as well as other districts hold. There is one water rights that MCDD holds, and so we wanted to make sure the new urban district's aware of that. But the rest of these bullets reflect on what things you folks have already identified as anticipated capital needs. The first one is the Corps' PMLS projects, in case you already talked about this. So collectively, the local match they're anticipating is $5.6 million for design, and then over $44 million for construction. Again, that's just local match. The total project costs, I believe, are north of $100 million. So I'm sorry I don't have that number offhand, but Colin might, and he can chime in if you have that interest. So in addition to the PMLS projects, we still have an interest to certify or accredit the levy system, so we can keep the insurance rates down. And so they're depending on the types of on the scope of the certification projects, those costs could range anywhere from 10.5 to almost $24 million. So those, again, the range is based upon how much is included in the scope of those projects based on multi-use, multi-benefit considerations. So the next 2 bullets are based upon some projections that MCD staff were able to do with a variety of resources, but we were able to come up with outlooks of capital needs over the first 20 years of the new district's operation. So this would start in FY 2026 and then 20 years out. And there are two different categories here. One is something called major capital improvements. And those projects represent improvements that have expenses that are over $1 million each. So we combine, we made some projections on what capital needs are anticipated for your district and others, and came up and then picked out the ones that were $1 million or more. And what came out was in the first 10 years, there were $24 million worth. And in the second 10 years, years 11 through 20, is $31 million worth of anticipated capital needs. The other bullet here is our capital improvements or operating capital requirements that are less than $1 million each. And you can see the numbers there of what, and you'll have more information on the next slide. But I did this for a primary reason to help the urban district board members think about, well, there could be some very significant capital improvements that are needed, and that may be more suited for something like a bond measure, for instance, as opposed to things that are requirements that could be almost annual capital improvements that need to be done that could be covered with other revenue tools. So I was trying to help them start to think about what different revenue options might be available. The last bullet on this list references something you know very well about, is that your district doesn't own all of the drainage assets. In fact, it doesn't own it it doesn't own any of the land, with the exception, I think, of pump stations 13th Avenue Pump Station and Schmier Road Pump Station area. It doesn't own any land where the levees are. And so you're reliant upon the work of other landowners and public agencies to make sure their land and their assets are functioning properly. And so we are in partnership with those entities to make sure that our systems are functioning well. And so there's a series of capital improvements of those additional assets that you don't own, but others do, that need to be addressed and make sure the system as a whole continues to function properly during that 20-year period. This is a glimpse of what operating capital requirements might look like over a 20-year period. This is fairly typical in utilities. There are waves of capital needs based upon when assets are first put in service. So if a lot of assets are put in service in one particular period of history, then when there's usually a wave of higher costs that come up when when their estimated useful life has finished. So, and there are other periods where there's very little capital improvements that are needed. So this is our current projection of what costs are. This is a graphical view of some of the numbers you saw on the previous slide. And we're going to continue to refine this before you see your final version of this. Again, all of this is future looking, but just trying to give the new urban district an idea of what type of costs they're going to start to face. So what's next? We need to finalize the draft report. We want to get input from you either today through email, or you have, I think, another opportunity. You have one more meeting in June, provide a few more pieces of information or feedback. And if you're comfortable with it, with that information, we're going to go have the board working group with Mary Helen and others discuss that feedback. And then come to you on the 29th with a possibility of approving the report. So that's my presentation. Probably was a little longer than I was anticipating, but I'll stop there. That's a lot of information to share. But if you have any questions or comments based on what you read ahead of time or what I mentioned here, I'm happy to answer the best I can. And Nick and hauling are available as well.
I do have a comment. It's a relatively minor thing, but since I spent the hours going through the dependencies last night, I want to catch about it. There's a couple of culverts that are described as being north of Meadow Lane on Northeast 13th. The description talks about them, one crossing 13th and one being to the east of 13th, north of Meadow Lane. Actually, it's north of Meadow Drive. Lane is the gravel drive down by me.
Right,
And
right.
that's drive, not lane. That's all.
Okay.
Just wanted to take advantage of having put in that hours last night. Anything else? Any director? Any supervisor? You should speak, let us know you're really there. Well, I guess not. Is there anything else on the agenda other than new business? Is there any new business?
Well, I believe there's a section about the CIP updates, Emily. Is that right? So that's.
Okay. Go for it.
Thank you. You have that the CIP updates were part of your packet. There's only 3 projects that you're focused on, that you're funded this year. We've talked about the fall protection project already, those 2 sites. We talked briefly about the timing of the Northeast 13th Avenue, I'm sorry, of the Smear Road pump station electrical upgrades. We're deferring that until 2 years out now. And then just a brief update about the Northeast 13th Avenue pump station discharge lines rehab project. We've